Still just a secretary, huh? My aunt mocked me. Next day, I was the CEO signing their $50 million deal. The clink of fine china against marble echoed through the grand dining hall as my aunt leaned back in her chair, a smug grin etched across her face. Her words hung heavy in the air, dripping with disdain. Still just a secretary, huh? The room seemed to shrink around me, every pair of eyes at the family gathering fixed on my flushed face. I could feel the heat rising from my neck, spreading like wildfire across my cheeks, but I forced myself to maintain eye contact, refusing to let her see how deeply her words cut. For years, I had endured these jabs, these subtle, and sometimes not so subtle reminders that my career choice didn't measure up to their lofty expectations. To them, being a secretary was synonymous with stagnation, a dead-end role reserved for those who lacked ambition or intelligence. They couldn't or wouldn't see the late nights I spent perfecting reports, the weekends I sacrificed to ensure meetings ran smoothly, or the countless hours I invested in learning everything I could about the inner workings of the company. To them, I was simply the help, an invisible cog in the corporate machine. But what they failed to understand was that this wasn't just a job to me, it was a stepping stone. Every memo I typed, every email I drafted, and every phone call I answered brought me closer to understanding the intricate dance of business operations. While others saw monotony, I saw opportunity. Each task, no matter how menial it seemed, offered a glimpse into the gears that kept the organization running. And though I may have started as just a secretary, I had long since outgrown the label. As my aunt's laughter mingled with the polite chuckles of distant relatives, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger, not entirely, but rather a quiet resolve. She thought she knew me, thought she understood the limits of my potential. But she was wrong. So very wrong. Because tomorrow, I would walk into that boardroom not as a secretary, but as its leader. The next morning arrived with a crispness that seemed almost symbolic. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the office building, casting golden streaks across the polished mahogany floors. My reflection stared back at me from the elevator doors as I rode upward, my tailored navy suit fitting perfectly, my heels clicking softly against the metal surface. For once, I didn't second-guess myself. There was no room for doubt today. This was my moment, and I intended to seize it fully. When the doors slid open, I stepped onto the executive floor, where the air carried an electric charge of anticipation. Normally bustling with assistants scurrying between offices and executives deep in conversation, the space now felt eerily still. Everyone knew what was happening today, the acquisition deal that would either make or break the company. A $50 million merger loomed over us all, and while most assumed it would be signed by our current CEO, fate had other plans. I made my way to the boardroom, each step deliberate and measured. The double doors stood imposingly before me, carved with intricate designs that spoke of power and legacy. Pushing them open, I entered a scene straight out of a movie. Around the massive oval table sat representatives from both companies, their expressions ranging from curiosity to thinly veiled skepticism. At the head of the table, however, sat an empty chair, the one meant for the person wielding ultimate authority. A murmur rippled through the room as I approached, my presence immediately commanding attention. Some recognized me instantly, their eyes widening in shock. Others exchanged confused glances, clearly unsure why someone they'd passed in the hallway countless times without a second thought was now walking toward the seat reserved for leadership. Before anyone could voice their bewilderment, I turned to address the group. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady and commanding despite the storm of emotions swirling within me. "I'm here to lead this meeting as interim CEO." Gasps erupted around the table, followed by hushed whispers. One man, a senior partner whose name I'd memorized during my days as a secretary, cleared his throat loudly, his tone laced with disbelief. "Interim? What happened to Robert?" My stomach churned at the mention of Robert's name. He had been the face of the company for nearly 2 decades, admired and respected by everyone. But yesterday, allegations of embezzlement surfaced, sending shockwaves through the organization. In a desperate attempt to salvage the deal, the board appointed me, a decision that left many questioning their judgment. "I'll explain the circumstances shortly," I replied calmly, taking my seat. "But first, let's focus on what matters most, securing this deal." With those words, I opened the folder in front of me, revealing pages upon pages of meticulously prepared notes. Over the past year, I had quietly observed every detail of the negotiations, anticipating challenges and devising strategies to overcome them. Now, those preparations would pay off. As the meeting progressed, I navigated each topic with precision, addressing concerns and offering solutions that even the most seasoned executives hadn't considered. My familiarity with the company's inner workings gave me an edge, allowing me to anticipate objections and counterarguments before they were voiced. Slowly but surely, the initial skepticism dissolved, replaced by grudging respect, and perhaps even admiration. Yet, beneath the surface of confidence I projected lay a wellspring of vulnerability. Every glance exchanged among the board members felt like a silent vote of distrust. Every question posed carried undertones of doubt about whether I belonged in this role. Doubt wasn't new to me. I'd faced it daily in my previous position, but this level of scrutiny was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Still, I reminded myself why I was here, not because I sought validation, but because I believed in the vision of this company and its potential to thrive under new leadership. By midday, progress had been made, but tensions remained high. The opposing party grew increasingly frustrated, their patience wearing thin as we debated terms that seemed minor to outsiders but held monumental implications for both sides. Just when it seemed we might reach an impasse, I decided to take a risk. Leaning forward, I locked eyes with their lead negotiator and said, "Let's set aside the numbers for a moment. Tell me, what do you truly hope to achieve with this partnership?" Silence fell over the room as he studied me, weighing my sincerity. Then slowly he began to speak, not as a corporate representative, but as a human being with dreams and aspirations tied to this deal. As he shared his perspective, I listened intently, nodding at key points and interjecting only to ask thoughtful follow-up questions. By the time he finished, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Walls of defensiveness crumbled, replaced by genuine collaboration. It was then that I realized something profound. Success wasn't solely defined by titles or accolades. It was about connection, empathy, and the ability to inspire trust even in the face of adversity. These qualities weren't taught in classrooms or acquired through promotions. They came from years of observing, listening, and learning. From being just a secretary. As the afternoon wore on, compromises were reached, agreements solidified, and handshakes exchanged. Though the official signing ceremony awaited another day, the hardest part was behind us. Exhaustion settled into my bones as I gathered my belongings, ready to retreat to the solitude of my temporary office. Yet, as I stepped out of the boardroom, I found myself surrounded by colleagues who once barely acknowledged my existence. Their smiles were tentative, their congratulations cautious, but they were there, nonetheless. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to savor the weight of accomplishment. Not because I needed external validation, but because I finally understood my worth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight, but tonight, I would celebrate the journey that led me here. And somewhere deep down, I hoped my aunt might catch wind of what transpired. If nothing else, perhaps she'd think twice before mocking someone's ambitions again. Little did I know, the story was far from over. The following days were a blur of activity, each moment pulling me deeper into the whirlwind of my new role. News of the merger spread like wildfire, and with it came a torrent of reactions, both positive and negative. Reporters clamored for interviews, industry insiders dissected every detail of the deal, and social media buzzed with speculation about the mysterious secretary-turned-CEO. Some hailed me as a trailblazer, proof that determination could shatter glass ceilings. Others dismissed me as a fluke, a placeholder until someone qualified could take over. Amid the chaos, I tried to stay grounded, clinging to the lessons I'd learned in the trenches of administrative work. Humility became my anchor. It reminded me that no matter how high I climbed, I was still the same person who had once fetched coffee and filed paperwork. But humility also demanded resilience, especially when whispers of doubt reached my ears. Colleagues I thought were allies questioned my decisions behind closed doors, while competitors seized the opportunity to undermine me publicly. The weight of their skepticism pressed down on me, threatening to crush the fragile confidence I'd fought so hard to build. One evening, after another grueling day of meetings and negotiations, I found myself alone in the corner office, the one Robert had occupied for years. It was larger than any space I'd ever worked in, its panoramic windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Yet, despite the opulence, it felt cold and impersonal, like a museum exhibit rather than a place where real life happened. I sank into the leather chair, staring blankly at the documents scattered across the desk, and let out a heavy sigh. That's when my phone buzzed. A text notification lit up the screen, and my heart sank as I recognized the sender, my aunt. My fingers trembled as I opened the message, bracing myself for another barb. Instead, what greeted me was even worse, a link to an article titled From Secretary to CEO, Luck or Scandal? Below it, her comment read, "Guess you finally found your shortcut." I stared at the words, feeling as though someone had punched me in the gut. Her mockery wasn't just cruel, it was calculated, designed to cut straight to the core of my insecurities. Was she right? Had I only gotten here because of circumstance, not merit? The questions swirled in my mind, amplifying the doubts I'd been trying so desperately to silence. 4 hours, I sat there, paralyzed by conflicting emotions. Anger simmered beneath the surface, mingling with shame and fear. Eventually, exhaustion forced me to leave the office, but sleep eluded me. Long after midnight, I lay awake, replaying every decision I'd made since stepping into this role. Had I earned this position, or was I simply filling a void left by scandal? And if I hadn't truly earned it, did that mean I didn't deserve it? The next morning, I arrived at the office early, determined to push past the storm brewing inside me. As I stepped off the elevator, however, I was greeted by an unusual sight, a small crowd gathered near reception. At first, I assumed there was some kind of emergency, a fire drill or technical issue, but then I noticed the cameras. Dozens of reporters lined the lobby, microphones thrust forward like weapons, shouting questions that echoed off the marble walls. What do you say to critics calling this a publicity stunt? Did you orchestrate Robert's downfall to secure your promotion? Is it true you're unqualified for this role? Each question hit me like a brick, chipping away at the fragile armor I'd constructed. For a moment, panic gripped me, rooting me to the spot. Then through the chaos, I spotted familiar faces, my team, standing shoulder to shoulder, shielding me from the onslaught. Their presence steadied me, reminding me that I wasn't alone. Taking a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and walked forward, ignoring the barrage of voices until I reached the conference room. Inside, tension crackled in the air. The board members sat stiffly around the table, their expressions grim. One of them, an older man named Mr. Caldwell, spoke first. "We need to address this," he said, his tone grave. "The press is tearing us apart, and investors are getting nervous. If we don't act quickly, this deal, and possibly the entire company, could collapse." His words sent a chill down my spine, but they also ignited something within me, a spark of defiance. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about protecting the livelihoods of hundreds of employees who depended on this company to survive. Failure wasn't an option, not now, not ever. "We'll hold a press conference," I announced, surprising even myself with the decisiveness in my voice. "But not to defend ourselves. To show them who we really are." Over the next few hours, we worked tirelessly, crafting a strategy that went beyond damage control. We decided to highlight the human side of the company, the stories of innovation, perseverance, and community impact that often got overshadowed by corporate jargon. I personally reached out to several employees, asking them to share their experiences during the press conference. Their enthusiasm was contagious, rekindling my belief in the mission we were fighting for. When the time came, I stood before the assembled reporters, my heart pounding but my resolve unwavering. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, meeting each camera lens head-on. "There's been a lot of speculation about how I ended up in this position, and I understand why people are curious. But instead of focusing on me, I want to introduce you to the real heroes of this company." One by one, employees took the stage, sharing heartfelt anecdotes about overcoming challenges, supporting one another, and driving change. There was Maria, a single mother who had risen from intern to department head, James, a veteran whose leadership transformed our supply chain, and Priya, a young engineer whose groundbreaking ideas had saved millions. Their stories painted a picture of a company built not on titles or egos, but on collaboration and grit. As the final speaker concluded, the room fell silent. Even the most cynical reporters seemed moved, scribbling notes furiously as they absorbed the authenticity of what they'd witnessed. When I returned to the podium, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. "This isn't just a business," I said, my voice steady. "It's a family. And together, we're going to prove that integrity and hard work can overcome anything, even doubt." The applause that followed was thunderous, a stark contrast to the hostility we'd faced earlier. Cameras flashed, capturing smiles and nods of approval, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to feel a glimmer of hope. But as I exited the stage, I knew the battle was far from over. Later that evening, As I reviewed the day's coverage, my phone buzzed again. Another text from my aunt appeared, this time accompanied by a screenshot of a scathing op-ed titled "The Secretary Who Played the System." Her message was brief: "They'll never respect you." Her words stung, but this time, they didn't break me. Instead, they fueled a quiet determination. Respect wasn't something anyone could give me, it was something I would have to earn, not just from others, but from myself. And as daunting as the road ahead seemed, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't done proving her wrong. Not yet. The weeks that followed were a test of endurance, both personally and professionally. The media frenzy died down slowly, replaced by a steady stream of challenges that tested every ounce of my resolve. Investors scrutinized my decisions with hawk-like precision, employees watched me warily, waiting to see if I'd crumble under pressure, and competitors circled like vultures, eager to exploit any misstep. Yet through it all, I held fast to the principles that had brought me this far: humility, perseverance, and an unwavering belief in the power of collective effort. One afternoon, as I sat in my office reviewing quarterly projections, there was a soft knock at the door. It was Maria, the same single mother who had spoken so eloquently during the press conference. She hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, clutching a folder tightly against her chest. "Do you have a minute?" she asked, her voice tinged with nervousness. "Of course," I replied, gesturing for her to sit. Maria took a deep breath before beginning. "I wanted to thank you for giving me a chance to speak, for believing in me when no one else did. But more than that, I wanted to share something." She opened the folder and slid a document across the desk. It was a proposal, a bold, innovative idea for expanding our community outreach program. Her hands trembled slightly as she explained the concept, but her passion shone through every word. By the time she finished, I was speechless, not because of the brilliance of her plan, though it was undeniably impressive, but because of what it represented. In that moment, I realized that leadership wasn't about having all the answers, it was about empowering others to find their own. Maria's courage inspired me to dig deeper, to push beyond the limits I'd unconsciously imposed on myself. Together, we refined the proposal, incorporating input from other departments until it became a cornerstone of our strategy. As the months passed, the company began to transform, not just financially, but culturally. Employees who had once felt invisible stepped forward with ideas and initiatives, breathing new life into projects that had stagnated under previous leadership. Morale soared, productivity skyrocketed, and even the skeptics started to soften their stance. Slowly but surely, the narrative shifted, from questioning my qualifications to celebrating the resurgence of the company itself. But the true turning point came unexpectedly, during a family gathering I had dreaded attending. My aunt's mocking texts had grown less frequent, though they still stung when they arrived. This time, however, I decided not to let her words dictate how I showed up. Dressed in a sleek black dress, I walked into the room with my head held high, ready to face whatever came my way. The atmosphere was tense at first, with awkward silences punctuating polite conversation. Then, midway through dinner, my uncle raised his glass. "I think we should acknowledge something," he said, his gaze locking onto mine. "Whatever you may think of her methods, there's no denying that she's turned this company around. I've seen the numbers, and they're extraordinary." A murmur of agreement rippled through the table, and for the first time in years, I saw glimpses of respect in their eyes. Even my aunt, seated across from me, seemed momentarily speechless. When dessert arrived, she leaned over and muttered, almost begrudgingly, "You've done well, for someone who started as a secretary." Her tone still carried traces of condescension, but it lacked its usual bite. For a brief moment, I considered letting the comment slide, but then I remembered everything I'd overcome to get here. Smiling sweetly, I leaned back in my chair and met her gaze. "Funny thing about starting as a secretary," I said, my voice calm but laced with steel. "It gives you a perspective most CEOs never get. So maybe being just a secretary isn't such a bad place to start after all." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. My aunt's cheeks flushed pink, but she didn't respond. Instead, she looked away, her expression unreadable. For the rest of the evening, she avoided meeting my eyes, and though part of me felt a pang of guilt, another part knew I'd finally reclaimed my power. Months later, as I stood on the stage at an industry awards gala, accepting the title of Business Leader of the Year, I reflected on the journey that had led me here. From the days of fetching coffee and answering phones to navigating billion-dollar deals and leading teams through crises, every step had shaped me into the person I was meant to become. The road hadn't been easy, in fact it had often felt impossible, but it had taught me invaluable lessons about resilience, authenticity, and the importance of staying true to oneself. As I accepted the trophy, I scanned the crowd, searching for familiar faces. Among them, I spotted Maria, beaming with pride, and several members of my team, cheering enthusiastically. And then, tucked away near the back of the room, I saw her, my aunt. Her arms were crossed, her expression guarded, but there was something different in her eyes this time. Not admiration, exactly, but perhaps, acknowledgement. When the ceremony ended, I made my way toward her, weaving through throngs of well-wishers and admirers. She looked startled when she saw me approaching, clearly unsure of what to expect. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, the years of tension and misunderstanding stretching between us like an unspoken chasm. Finally, I broke the silence. "Thank you," I said softly, surprising even myself. "For what?" she asked, her brow furrowing in confusion. "For pushing me," I replied. "Even when your words hurt, they pushed me to prove myself, to you, to everyone, and most importantly to me." She blinked, taken aback by my response. Then, after a long pause, she nodded slowly. "Well," she murmured, her voice barely audible, "you certainly proved something." It wasn't an apology, nor was it a full endorsement, but it was enough. Enough to close the chapter of doubt and resentment that had haunted me for so long. Enough to remind me that while external validation could boost confidence, true fulfillment came from within. That night, as I drove home beneath a canopy of stars, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The battles weren't over. I knew there would always be new obstacles to face, but I also knew I was ready for them. Because I wasn't just a secretary anymore. I wasn't just a CEO either. I was a leader, a fighter, and above all, someone who refused to let anyone define her worth but herself.